Shabbat Shalom. So it's very important news that I have to share with you. I've changed my internet provider. Now, it's actually a fairly big deal because until very recently, we didn't really have a lot of choice. We were stuck with the provider that covered our district, and that was it. Take it or leave it. And obviously, you can't leave it when it comes to the internet. We don't watch cable TV or need their telephone service, but we did need the internet. But another provider was able to offer as good, if not actually better service. So now, went forward and never looked back. When I had the conversation with the representative on the phone, trying to encourage me to stay, I said, no thank you. They had taken enough of my money and given me enough inadequate service for 10 years. I was only too happy to move on. And in fact, there are many things in my life that I am more than happy to walk away from and not look back or even give much of an explanation. If someone came along to me and said, hey, Rabbi Neely, I like your car, and they made me an offer that was more than I would ever expect to get for it, it's also about 10 years old, I'd be happy to sell it. I've got no deep and abiding emotional attachment to the vehicle. It's a vehicle. I like it, don't get me wrong, it served me well, but for the right price, that car could be yours and I wouldn't shed a tear. Even my house, which I happen to also love and really feel very happy that we have it, if someone made me a deal that I couldn't say no to, it might be a higher deal that I'd require given all the fuss and muss of packing up and moving somewhere else in the city. But sure, I could be convinced. I don't think it's going to happen, but it just shows that there are many things in my life that I could easily let go of. My congregation, my family, no, very different. And hopefully you can understand why. A commitment you have to a community is not something that is easily set aside just because someone offers a more enticing benefit package. A commitment you have to your loved ones, whether it be your spouse, your extended family, your children. Obviously, this is far beyond any price tag, no matter what someone might offer, and could never be set aside. Although, not speaking personally, but when we look at the Torah portion this week, sometimes there are certain relationships that seem to have a little trouble. We are studying the section of Sota right now, and for a much more detailed analysis, please check out my YouTube series on the Mishnah of Sota. But long story short, if there is a case where the husband is deeply suspicious of jealousy, it seems that there is a ritual for him to test her by taking her to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, or eventually the Temple of Jerusalem, and to go through an ordeal to prove whether or not she is actually guilty of what he suspects. Doesn't sound like that's a relationship that's in great shape. If you can only imagine what it must be like to take your spouse, your beloved, all the way to Jerusalem, or to have your spouse, your beloved, take you to Jerusalem with this suspicion, and to have to stand in front of the community and go through the ritual with the Kohen, that doesn't sound very good. That does not sound very ideal. In fact, it sounds a little barbaric, if we're going to speak honestly. It sounds a little like the Salem witch trials or other trials by ordeal that were used in many parts of the world. It also sounds deeply unfair with the husband holding all the cards in this relationship. Now, all of those, I have to tell you, if you go and study the Mishnah with me online, you will recognize are not what they seem from your superficial reading of the text. But instead there were severe limits on under what circumstances the ritual could be performed, what testimony was needed, how it would be conducted, how the woman would be treated, how the husband would be treated. It is not as simplistic and unequal or barbaric as you might assume, having only read the chapter once. But it does still look like a big problem that was going on. No matter how well you dress it up, no matter how much you legalize and put it behind a wall of justice and fairness, that relationship is in trouble, isn't it? Well, yes and no. Which is to say there's trouble and then there's trouble. There is trouble that leads to a dissolution of a relationship, and Judaism codifies and respects that. There are certain relationships, certain spousal commitments, that do need to be dissolved. Divorce is perfectly fine and appropriate in many circumstances in Jewish life. And Judaism does not twist the arm or force people to stay in a marriage that they have decided is absolutely irrecoverable. I think there was an extra syllable I missed. Instead, Judaism says, look, if this is truly a relationship that cannot be salvaged, if it is abusive, if it is problematic, if it is simply two people who are both good but moving in opposite directions, if that is the ultimate decision, then divorce is always an option. But you'll notice in the story of Sota, with all of its ritual and ordeal, they are actually going through with the ritual and ordeal. They are not pulling the eject button and going for divorce. With divorce always being an option when you see somebody not engaging in divorce, despite difficulty, that is actually a time, as much as it may seem odd to say in regards to the Sota ritual, that is a time when we should take notice and perhaps even be encouraged. We can't applaud the jealousy, we can't applaud the behavior that led to suspicion, if there was any, but we can applaud that both the husband and the wife have chosen to go through this ritual in order to try and find a moment for reconciliation. If the woman truly was an adulteress, if she knew that she were actually guilty, she is allowed to say, yep, you know what, you got me, I did it, and walk away. That's it. She walks away. She cannot get married to her husband again. She can't get married to the lover either. But no ritual, no Jerusalem, no bitter waters to drink, just the marriage is over. Likewise, if the husband refuses to take her to Jerusalem, then again, they divorce, no ritual, no recriminations, it's just over and done. For the ritual to occur, both parties essentially have to be willing to go through with it. But why would they? Why would they go through with it? Because they actually want to get back together. They're just fumbling in the dark trying to find the path. And the Torah offers them a meaningful ritual for their day, which may not seem quite like what we would do now, but for them was the equivalent of marriage counseling. It was the equivalent of allowing both of them to stand up and say, things have gotten really bad between us, but I am willing to go through with this if I think it will allow us to reconcile, to resolve our differences, to put aside the suspicions, and actually come back together again as a healthy relationship. To recognize that relationships will all have problems at one point or another, to one degree or another, that is a huge part of what we are missing in the modern world. Too often we present only the ideal, too often we present only the opposite of the ideal, and too little we represent the reality, which is a little of A and a little of B. A lot of wonderful times, a few rocky times, but the determination to make sure that the rocky moments do not lead us to pull that eject button and escape from what might be a relationship that could last decades and provide greater love and security and wonderful experiences together. What Judaism is saying through the Sota ritual is that things do happen. They do lead to bad feelings, to hurt feelings. They do lead to suspicions. They may even lead to behavior that is unbecoming. But that doesn't mean that you should toss a relationship aside as easily as you would toss aside your internet provider. But instead, try. See if there is a time to reconcile. See if there is a way that you can find whatever it was that brought you together in the first place, to have that be renewed and to reinvigorate the relationship. If not, fine, divorce. There is no shame in that in Judaism, and often it is exactly the right solution to some relationships. But if there is a way to reconcile, if there is something that you can do to put a little more effort into preserving the relationship rather than simply throwing it aside, thinking you're going to get a better deal with the next provider, then don't you owe it to yourself as well as your spouse to take the time and see if reconciliation is possible? If not, you're no worse off. If so, how much more have you gained, and how much more do you now understand of what is truly worth preserving in life and what it takes to preserve it? It takes a little extra effort. It takes a little extra walking. But it is worth it, and it is what God has asked us to do. Shabbat Shalom.